Welcome everybody to Pop Culture. I am Scott.
I'm Jason.
And I'm Monica.
And this episode we are reviewing the Many Saints of Newark. Newark. A new film directed by Alan Taylor, written by the great David Chase. This is a prequel to The Sopranos, which no secret how much I love The Sopranos. So I was very excited for this.
Well, yeah, The Sopranos itself was when television changed its position in critical acclaim, I think. It's one of those shows amongst others like The Wire and Deadwood and so on, where suddenly television series were taking on such a great
So what you're saying is HBO.
Yeah, it's HBO, but even the other channels started creating much better quality television. I mean, HBO is renowned for it. So it's interesting to go sort of backwards for the prequel to film. And so I found that was always going to be an interesting thing to see. So, yeah, it's worthy of making something for it, that's for sure, The Sopranos.
Yeah. I have to admit, I've never seen The Sopranos, but I understand its significance to the golden age of TV. And I don't know why I haven't seen it, because I really like James Gandolfini a lot. And I was actually very relieved to discover that I did not need to have seen it in order to really appreciate and like this movie. So
just that massive spoiler in the opening scene for when you watch all of The Sopranos.
Yeah, I was like, okay.
Like, oh, Chris.
But that's the case with most mafia films. No one comes out alive. That's
true.
Yeah. So interestingly, this had very strong shades of Scorsese, I have to say, on the outset there. It sort of, with the essence of The Sopranos, it is a great addition to the whole collection of mafia films out there. So it's certainly stands up to all of those films that we've had before us that are high quality. And I was really, really impressed with this.
Well, interestingly, I say that because Alan Taylor, the director of this film, who has directed a couple of stinkers in the past, but nothing, like, he's well and truly redeemed himself, as we'll talk more about Many Saints of Newark in a second. He learned his craft at New York University, where his teacher was Martin Scorsese.
Makes sense.
Uh-huh.
There you go.
We have completed the circle.
It's a closed loop. It's so satisfying.
Yeah. I guess because Scorsese has just really perfected what a gangster film looks like. So that's sort of the gold standard that everyone compares all these sorts of movies to. So,
well, I think he sort of does I'm not denying that, like, the Goodfellas and stuff are kind of grand, but they're not grand in the sense that The Godfather is grand. They're kind of a little more, I find, grounded and icky.
Yes, I was going to say they've got that griminess to them.
Yeah, which I think is probably more fitting. I think glorification of these characters isn't necessarily the best approach, and I think Scorsese certainly had a talent for making them fallible and likable necessarily. And I think The Sopranos certainly was a show that never really painted any characters in particularly positive light.
Yeah, and you know what? Neither does this film. There's a lot of characters to really meet, especially with the main character, Dickie, who was played by Alessandro Nivola, who is completely unrecognizable. I was just like, is that the guy from Jurassic Park 3? And from oh my God.
It's got the hang glider guy from Jurassic Park.
Yeah. But everyone in this film, they're very interesting characters, but they're not anyone that you would ever want to be in a room with and have a conversation with. They're not nice people at all.
No, not at all. All the acting throughout it was outstanding. I mean, obviously Alessandro was awesome, and he did disappear into his role entirely, and that's why it was hard to recognize him.
I can't believe this dude hasn't been, like, crushing it since 2001.
Yeah. He did such a superb job.
Yeah.
And so did everybody else. Like Vera Farmiga was wonderful as the matriarch of the family. She just fabulous.
It was grossing me out because I'm not a fan of Liv Soprano in the show, and it is a scary how close to the character her performance was to the original Livia Soprano. It was like eerie. The voice and the cadence.
Yeah.
Because she's not a nice person.
I have to say, eerie was Michael Gandolfini.
Yeah.
Tony, young Tony. That was haunting in moments where you literally, I mean, obviously genetically he's already got the connection, but then in his acting, he just sort of captured those mannerisms every once in a while that
you could see
you'd gone back in time.
Yeah.
You can see the shades of the future kind of gangster that the character becomes. So I thought that was very intriguing, and I really liked sort of the way that they built his story up in the background, being this mischievous little kid to, you know, arranging illegal gambling dens in his own school and getting kicked out and suspended. You see those very early signs that he is someone who's very intelligent, very calculating, is a born leader, and he's also, in a strange way, has this mentorship from Dickie too. So I loved watching that.
And I think credit to David Chase, where you've got the character of Dickie Moltisanti as the, you know, the guy who creates, I guess, what Tony Soprano will become, and then the relationship that Tony shares with Christopher is a very key element to the show. When you get around to watching it, you'll understand. And it was really nice, and it was really nice and kind of like a little messed up when you get to where their relationship ends up. So that was really, I found it kind of confronting, I guess, because I know the show so well.
And you know what happens to the character.
It was unfortunate.
It's interesting because the film stands on its own, definitely.
Yeah.
I don't think you have to have seen The Sopranos whatsoever to enjoy it as it is. But if you've seen The Sopranos, the connections are just like haunting, eerie, everything. It was
like this was all pre-planned somehow.
Yeah.
How amazing! I just want to quickly for Jason seen Sopranos. John Magaro as Silvio Dante. The walk and it was unreal. We had Billy. I'm gonna murder this. Magnuson, Paulie Walnuts was also pretty, like, they're all recognizable. You would be like, oh yep, awesome, that's Silvio, that's Paulie, that's Pussy. And then Corey Stoll as the horrific monster that is Junior Soprano.
I was gonna say Corey Stoll completely disappeared into this role. Like, he's such a gifted actor, and I really enjoyed the little snippets of this really vindictive, mean-spirited, awful character he played.
And when you watch the show, you'll understand completely, because he's just a bastard.
I will say this does make me want to watch The Sopranos, which I think is a really good thing. And I guess the other standout performance we have to talk about would be Ray Liotta playing twins.
As the twins.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I really enjoyed him.
I like the different, like there's the stark contrast between these two brothers.
Yeah, it's almost, you could picture them as the same character on experiencing different consequences. So we obviously have the father who's out, he's brought his young Italian wife, you know, he's been able to carry on to be this horrible, horrible human being. And then you have his twin who's in prison, and he's sort of slowly learning the errors of his ways, or it appears that he is learning the errors of his ways, and he's providing this guidance to Dickie when he visits him. So very interesting performance, very nuanced, I think.
Absolutely.
No, phenomenal.
That difference of character, you can see how they started in the same place, I guess.
And ended up in different destinations.
But because he's in jail for so much longer, and he sort of, I guess, self-actualized would be the best word. He sort of understood who he was, and he just says, I'm a murderer, and states it quite flatly to Dickie. You know, I know a murderer when I see a murderer is the underlying point there. But
you could just tell that he's just like, I know what you're actually talking about. Don't talk to me like I'm an idiot. You know, I understand exactly what's going on.
So it was amazing, and it was sort of great seeing Liotta back in that sort of form as well. That's I've always had this little awkward thing of seeing him do gangsters again, because it just propels me straight back to Goodfellas. But
Yeah.
this
how-
was
how-
different enough for me to go, yep, this was really good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's so iconic in that role. I mean, that's one of those films that sort of is transcendent in terms of pop culture. It's up there for a reason, and his performance in it is it's what you see when you see Ray Liotta. You see, I can't even remember the character's name at the moment. It's just terrible of me, but anyway. Besides the point.
I also really loved, just with the last performance that really stood out to me was Leslie Odom Jr. playing Harold. I thought he was so interesting, creating his own African American crime syndicate after he's released from prison, and I love how it's framed against the Newark riots, and it's depicted in a very accurate kind of way. When I was doing my research, Alan Taylor was actually a history professor before he became a director, so he ended up, in the name of, I guess, portraying something accurately, he recreated archival footage from those riots to use in the film. And it just really paints it all to be a lot more realistic and grounded. And I really bought into the character's plight. So I thought that was a really nice touch.
Oh, you just gave me the great segue. The color palette of the 60s and the look of the production design is the most authentic I have ever seen. I would have to say, down pat. Usually when 60s films are sort of created, I think they push the saturation up just a little bit too much quite often. And even though the colors were there in that decade, if you're capturing it, it wouldn't necessarily come across that way. So it sort of had that faded photograph that you'd get from that time and the color palette. And I just was blown away by how much I felt like I was grounded in that decade with what I was watching, on top of what you just mentioned with the historical recreations of things. It was outstanding.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, when they think of the 60s, everyone immediately goes to the very graphic and colorful Austin Powers movies, which I think is while it's definitely a part of 60s culture, that's not the only thing.
Well, it's like the exaggeration of hippie culture.
Yeah, exactly right. And it completely dismisses everything else that was going on in that period. So, yeah.
Yeah, which, I mean, this is the opposite of that. We've got very conservative characters in there. I guess they're, not in regards to their appreciation of the law, but in terms of culture, they're they're obviously that sort of mafioso Catholic family.
Yeah,
but,
and it's also
you have the kids listening to the music and dressing that way, and then getting chastised for it. But it's it was really well done.
Yeah, I think this film's also a lot of ways about outsiders trying to create their own, I guess, their own businesses, their own family, their own sense of community, because you have obviously the Italian-American experience compared to the African-American experiences. Both in American culture at that point would have been considered others and not in a good sense. So I thought it was a very interesting exploration of the mafia groups because they are outsiders. And that comes into conflict with the law.
Yeah, definitely. I think Harold's character portrays that really well, where he kind of does like every other character is kind of already in these established families, in the 5 families of New Jersey or whatever they call themselves, and then he sort of does it for nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
He's an errand boy for Dickie.
Yeah, and then he turns out to be this massive threat, and that leads us to a really horrible torture scene in a garage, which I turned away. I was like, oh.
Like, that's a drill. That's a really big drill.
I'm like, what are they doing? No.
And then if we're gonna, let's talk about the sort of ending of the story now. So, spoiler alert, I'm gonna ruin it for you. If you haven't seen it, go see it. It sort of seems to be framing this confrontation building between Harold and Dickie. How Dickie kind of set Harold up and gave him the money to sort of get him out of Dodge and stuff like that. And it's building to what you think will be kind of a conflict between these two characters. And then it's all sort of cut short by typical junior soprano nonsense. In a really abrupt and genuinely horrific, like it hit me because I was like, what? But it made so much sense because that's exactly what Junior would do.
Yeah, without knowing too much of the background of The Sopranos, I couldn't help but feel like, oh, really? Okay. I was hoping for more of a Harold, dispensing of poor Dickie, and I thought that would have brought a lot more gratification for the film. But I understand what you're saying with Junior. That also does make sense, I suppose.
It sets up, I think, it sets up who Junior becomes as well, in terms of he's kind of the antagonist to
Yes.
Tony for a lot of the show.
Oh, okay. That makes a lot of sense. And I mean, killing off his mentor and everything like that then does sort of,
yeah, it's sort of the baggage of its
yeah, it's the one thing that like
show,
hangs on to The Sopranos really. But it was like oddly like, oh, of course.
Yeah, the conclusion of the film sort of made me feel like I accepted that for Dickie. That wasn't really a big issue for me. It just sort of didn't quite resolve for me the direction that Tony Soprano goes.
Yeah.
And I think it was just that lack of screen time for Tony to be
apparently
developing.
It's a planned trilogy, so
okay, well now I can accept that.
Same with like Harold's character as well. So I imagine the David Chase's intention is that all that stuff's got to come to a head.
Yeah,
obviously,
surely.
With the Italians on top.
Yeah. It sounds like a trilogy I'll be watching.
Yeah, same here.
It is like I didn't think I needed or wanted this until I've gotten it, and now I'm so very grateful that I got it.
It's very good. Interestingly, though, it's not critically doing well, I noticed.
I think a lot of people are using, I guess, the legacy of The Sopranos to compare it with, which I don't think is entirely fair. Yes, it is a prequel to the television show, and the television show is heralded as this really great thing. But with films, I think they need to be able to stand on their own, and I think people are maybe not giving it enough credit.
Maybe. I mean, 73% on Rotten Tomatoes isn't bad.
No, not by any means. But as Jason said, I think he's right, where a lot of people are critiquing the film because it's not as good as the television series, or the film.
It's also obviously walking in the shadows of things like Goodfellas and
of course,
which are hard things to kind of ignore. But I mean, there's so many rubbish gangster films that have been made. I don't think it's by any stretch bad. I mean, I loved it. I would go watch it again right now. I really, really liked it. Now, maybe that's my emotional attachment to The Sopranos, is this show that I watched kind of at the right moment growing up, where it was like enough to be like bowled over by it and to understand it.
I would really like to see this at the cinema, I think. I enjoyed watching it at home, don't get me wrong, but I think maybe seeing it on a very big screen, I think would just make it even better.
Because it's beautiful to look at. Yeah,
it's great to look at. I, as Jason said, I love the colors in this movie and the sets, and I just think it's beautiful to watch.
Oh, the costuming, the action moments when they do happen are like tense.
Absolutely.
So no, Many Saints of Newark. Go check it out. And if you like The Sopranos, you're gonna, I think, really enjoy it.
Or possibly be disappointed. Who knows? It could
maybe. Maybe. I don't know. Well, I mean,
it might divide people, I think.
Well, you and I both appreciated it. We've seen The Sopranos. Monica hasn't seen The Sopranos and still really appreciated it, which is, I think, speaks all the more about how the quality of the film.
I think as well, because it makes me want to watch The Sopranos. So I think that's a good thing as well.
Yeah.
Which
I think if you like this, you're gonna. I think that's a very. You're a social experiment. Now you're the first person.
Am I?
Yeah, it was like a friend of mine was like, "Can you do me?" Because I haven't really watched Breaking Bad, which is probably one of the other big TV pillars that people keep talking about, and I've not really. I tried and I couldn't get into it, but someone was like, "Can you please be the first person to watch Better Call Saul, then go watch Breaking Bad, just to see what it does to you."
Those are two very different shows.
Yeah, right. So I think it's cool that what an interesting place to start watching The Sopranos from is sort of knowing who some of these people become.
Yeah, it's sort of like cluing me in on a background for everybody. You know how a lot of films do a quick introduction of all your characters. I think this was a very nice introduction to me. It sets me up to have an expectation, I suppose.
Oh, Silvio.
I certainly strongly suggest go watch the first episode as soon as possible.
I'll be doing that this afternoon.
Yeah.
The ducks. It's all about the ducks. Cool. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of Pop Culture. We have another little gangster film coming up for you.
Sort of gangster heist, sort of.
Well, there's a period piece and there are guns. Anyway.
Yep. Money involved.
And not to mention a common member of the cast as well.
Yes. Yes. A
Surprise
smattering
comment.
of Leota all over the place.
Yes, we are now entering into a new cinematic movement called the Renaissance.
Yes. Yes. All right. Thank you guys for
Boom
listening to this episode. What? Oh,
I said boom tish.
Thank you.
Monica pulls out the dad jokes. So proud of you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for listening to this episode of Pop Culture. I've been.
I'm still Jason.
And I'm still Monica.